Cool, okay, so the reason I'm doing a brown bag is because simply I got asked to because of the training I did. Bear with me, it's going back, I did my training back in June, so it's going back a little while now, so last minute frantic, kind of get my demo app working and put the slides together. So I've still got enough knowledge to kind of give a presentation, so it should be alright, hopefully anyway. So the reason I decided to do WebSockets for training is more of a personal interest really. I've worked on a couple of projects before which have required very sort of snappy sort of feedback from server to client and client to server, and at the time WebSockets weren't really sort of like widely around. They weren't really something that's really sort of considered. So at the time it was sort of like there were sort of two different sort of ways we could do it, and I'll explain those a bit later in the presentation. But so for my own personal interest, when I found out about WebSockets, I think I was talking to Mark Hobson, I just thought, oh, that's something I really want to kind of have a look at and consider really with writing web apps. So that's the reason behind it. So I spent a bit of training just kind of researching the topic, having a look at the different frameworks out there and different APIs for using them, and putting together a Spring-based app to demonstrate the knowledge. So I've got something to show you at the end, which hopefully might be quite good. Go from there. Has anyone actually looked at WebSockets before?
I ran a Wikipedia entry before I came.
Sorry? Wikipedia.
Before I came in.
What about socket programming? Has anyone done any socket programming before? Yeah. Okay. So essentially, for those if you haven't, sockets are just sort of like TCP connections that you can create over the network, and they're bi-directional. So once a connection's open, you can connect to it and send messages and receive messages, and that's both machines. So tend not to think of it as server and client. It's just either two machines or many machines connecting up to a socket and actually writing data to and from. So it's incredibly low level, so it's nice and quick. So for low latency applications, it's really useful. So the idea behind sort of like applying that to the web is really because I tend to think of like web-based development. For example, we take the REST framework. It's all done based on URLs and verbs to express to the server what the information you want, and then the server then responds with information, and the client then deals with it and does what it needs to do. But we tend not to think of it as the server wanting to notify the client that something's happened. It tends to always be focused on client server, and the server just gives you information back. Whereas WebSockets, you have this socket open, this connection open between the server and the client, but both have the ability to send messages to and fro. So it's bi-directional. So any kind of client which is connected up to a WebSocket to the server can then notify that client, or however many clients are open, that something's happened, whether it be, I don't know, an update for a trade on a stock exchange or something, whether it be a chat room or something like that. You can just notify all the clients in one go, and it's incredibly snappy. So in terms of implementation, there's things to consider, like you can, it's very low level, so you can send a load of information down, onto a socket. But in terms of formatting that, it's things like, well, who's the message for? You might need to write something on the client side and the server side, to determine whether or not you're interested in that message or not. And also, you have to kind of agree on a kind of format so that both the server and the client can understand messages. So, the reason why they kind of, well, if we give a little bit of history, the reason why it's not so sort of like supported really, and it's only become sort of recent. Socket programming has been around for a couple of decades at least, whereas WebSockets have only really just starting to coming into effect really. And the reason why is because it has been this kind of server-client architecture, and there is this kind of request response kind of attitude towards sort of web-based applications, and also simply because of the need for it. So for example, you've got a mail client like the Outlook client. You don't necessarily need a WebSocket open and constantly, asking, is there any more mail, is there any more mail, is there any more mail? You can get away with a web-based email client just checking periodically every sort of like couple of minutes or so, and that will suffice to users, no problem at all. But for more low latency apps, like sports tickers, chat rooms, things like that, where you want kind of the information very, very quickly. So as soon as the server knows about something, all the clients kind of want to know about that information very quickly. So as more and more of those apps are sort of coming out now on web-based, there is more of a need for support to have sort of WebSocket architecture there really, so that it can do this. The irony is it has been around because things like online multiplayer games have been around for quite a while now. They use that sort of architecture. But it's just not really, it's all sort of like created by them, used by them. It's not something that's sort of widely supported, that's sort of available. Until now really, it's, Spring, when I actually started this training, the week before Spring released their version of WebSockets, so it was kind of a really good time to look at it. And yeah, so now there's more sort of support coming along. It's probably, it's quite an interesting topic to kind of get into. And also, one of the other reasons it's kind of not been widely around for a while is because you can write applications, with background requests using Ajax and make the web pages fairly dynamic anyway. So it gives the users a nice feel that the app is really responsive anyway. Moving on. As I was saying earlier, popular use cases for it: multiplayer online games, chat applications, the sports ticker, anything with real-time updates, anything that requires a real low latency to get information to and from server and client. That's kind of some popular examples of what it's used, how it's used at the moment. So applying those.
If I can ask a question, what's the scaling like on this?
Scaling.
Yeah, because if these are permanently open connections to the server, how many sockets can you open on a server? It's kind of what I'm wondering.
Good question.
60,000.
30,000.
23.
42,000.
It depends.
Yeah.
I'm getting a feel.
Could ask Starling.
Right.
But no, I think it's just down to resources really, I think, on the server side.
Yeah.
From the client's point of view, it's just one connection that's open.
Yeah, it's really
the server is, yeah, because
it does mean that you need to do things like not use a server that has a thread per socket.
yeah,
Or like
Yeah.
old Apache.
yeah, because I'll explain it when I get on to the code snippet. But essentially, the server will have an idea of sessions that are open. So as soon as someone tries to connect to the socket, it generates a session.
Yeah.
And from that, the server has a list, a collection of sessions.
But by definition, these sessions last as long as the client session lasts.
Yeah.
So you do have resources tied to each socket.
Yeah, you can close the connection from the server point of view,
Yeah.
and you can have the client handle that. So you could write some sort of last recently used algorithm to
But
deal
ideally,
with.
for scaling, what you'd want to be able to do is kind of park one,
Yeah,
so that it's not consuming any resources, but it's kind of hanging around.
So,
yeah. I don't think you
at
can.
the fundamental level, the port address on the machine
Yeah.
is a 16-bit number. You've got the low-level ones that are supported, so that's why I said 65,000 is going to be the absolute top.
So it is a port. Each one is matched to a port.
Yeah, each one of them is going to be a separate. Oh,
It's HTTP.
yeah, actually, the server side is the same
Yeah.
port, so you might be fine.
No.
I think though either way it's going to be lower resource usage than previously when you do, if you want to keep a long-lived connection open
Yeah.
and using something like Comet, or whatever for doing server push stuff, that was tying up a lot more connections. You couldn't then close them down from the server
Should
side.
do the same.
Yeah.
Requests from
Yeah, as I was kind of explained that we've not really used the term earlier, but polling is another. It's kind of a popular way that has been used before. We're just constantly, clients are constantly checking the server. Have you got an update? Have you got an update? And another interesting one, I don't know the name for it, but I was reading up about it when I was in training, that you can actually tell the server to keep the HTTP request open.
That's
and you can
Comet or Meteor,
yeah.
I think it's called. It's a pseudo server push mechanism.
Okay.
Yeah, basically relies on having a long-lived HTTP connection
yeah.
open, but it's essentially quiet, and you need to be careful on your client that you only have one of those open to avoid the, otherwise you run out of, you hit the maximum 4 open connections to one server or whatever it is.
Yeah. So there's a bit of management on the server side.
So I've seen it referred to as a long pole.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But it's
But
not
also,
really polling.
don't be confused, HTTP has something which is called keep connection open, which has nothing to do with long pole, which is having multiple requests going to the same connection one after another,
Okay.
which is HTTP protocol.
So, yeah, I mean, they're that kind of activity can be done, but if you're thinking, real time updates, then it's kind of not really feasible. So, I mean, WebSockets are kind of a really ideal case for that. So, applying them. So, essentially, all you've got to do is create this connection, and then have client and server attach event handlers to that connection for dealing with handling and receiving a message, opening connection, receiving a message, closing connection, and dealing with errors. So it's fairly straightforward, and there are plenty of APIs out there for creating sockets, and there are several sort of WebSocket-based APIs as well. As I say, Spring released their version in the summer. So, and they're all fairly straightforward in terms of it's the same concept. You have this connection, attach event handlers to it, and that's it. You start writing your messages.
Is this browser independent?
I'll get onto that.
Sorry.
Sorry. So, from point of view, as I was mentioning, from applying it, it is just that sort of simple from a JavaScript perspective. There's a little bit of error handling and stuff to do, but essentially you create a WebSocket, you attach event handlers to it, and you write your code accordingly. So it's kind of a nice.
Is the error that you're handling are these connection-based errors that you're typically dealing with?
So if the connection, for whatever reason, the connection drops, halts, you can deal with it accordingly. From server side, probably a bit hard to see really.
So just thinking back a little bit. So there's no concept of a request with a response. We'd model that as you send one message, and a while later, an asynchronous message comes back.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean,
It's a socket.
your first thing you do is to connect. So your
Yeah.
client will go, right, connect me to this WebSocket, and then as soon as you want to start writing messages, you can do.
Yeah.
What you expect back from that is entirely your own implementation. So if you want to mimic a request response, you just send a message and then
Yes.
hang around and wait for the response to come back. It's a bit hard to see really because of the size of the font, but essentially it's similar on the server side of things. You've got this list of maintainable list of sessions that can be open at any one time, and if you want to broadcast all those sessions, as soon as you receive a message or you want to activate a new message, you just get all those sessions and then you call send message on it, pass in your text message, and off you go. So it's really sort of lightweight, really easy to use, and yeah, it was fairly straightforward to put together. So things like RabbitMQ and ActiveMQ do support WebSockets, so you could use one of those implementations. And a lot of us here worked on Trust, about RabbitMQ. So you can use that to achieve the same kind of thing. but there are sort of drawbacks around it. I mean, if you're exposing it, then you're kind of exposing some of the implementation of your server to all clients. So if you're fussed about that sort of thing, you really want, you may want to steer clear of that and actually write your own sort of like using the WebSocket API and write your own implementation. But if you want something nice and easy, then yeah, RabbitMQ will do it, ActiveMQ will do it. It's there if you need it.
The Java code that you had running there, Ian, is that, do you run that inside your web server in your Jetty or Tomcat or whatever?
Yeah.
And that connects into there and you expose some sort of servlet, standard servlet doing to receive these?
Yeah, you basically extend using the API that I was using, you extend the class and then you instantiate one in Spring and it all gets kind of managed for you. So you just have one of those running on the server and you've got the ability to create the connection, close it, send messages and then again receive messages from it. So, as I was explaining earlier, it's only really starting to become a bit more supported. Jetty, I've had to use Jetty 9 to kind of create something and create an application server and run it. Apparently it's available in Tomcat 8, but I had no luck with that, so I gave up and just used Jetty.
What stuff did it need out of Tomcat?
It doesn't use a servlet. It uses a different. It uses a socket listener rather than a servlet. The servlets are geared around this request response life cycle. So you need something which will just asynchronously sit there.
So it's sit there listening
firing
to
off,
socket
listening to events.
Yeah.
So would it likely be the case that the thing that you've got listening on that port is dedicated to listening to these sockets and isn't a web server at the same time?
I think so. Yeah, it's a separate piece of
Well, I
architecture.
guess if you're using Jetty or Tomcat, then it could be doing both. It could be serving HTTP on port 80 and WebSockets on ports 10,000 through to 60,000.
Yeah, because that's essentially, when I show you the app that I wrote, that's essentially what I'm doing. I've got an MVC app running a REST interface for, it's basically a CRUD app to give me some access to information and write some information. And then I've got the WebSockets for clients to listen to receive updates on that information, all served under Jetty 9. Let's say, yeah, Tomcat 8 apparently supports it, but I had no luck. So IE10, so browser support, IE10 Plus supports it. Firefox, I think 10 Plus supports it as well. So browsers are slowly coming around to that idea. So yeah, I mean, when I was looking at issues with browser support at the time, it was like, right, you need the latest IE, or you need the latest Firefox. In terms of it now, it may be a bit better supported.
Is WebSockets part of HTML5?
Yes, I think so.
Right, so browsers that are advertising HTML5 support ought to be able to do it, give or take bugs.
Yeah, and there are some issues with proxies and nice typo there. So you can get past firewalls and what have you with it, but there are certain issues around proxy servers and that sort of thing. So there's that to kind of bear in mind if you.
Does it have the same limitations in that you can only make a connection back to the original server that the page is being served from, or can you make if your page is served from host A, can you make a WebSocket request to host B, or do you have to?
Only if, well, if I understand your question right, only if host A has the support to give you something running to be able to give you that.
Does JavaScript have the same origin? Restriction?
Yeah. So with JavaScript, if you want to access anything on a different server, you have to have essentially a little proxy running on host A that will send it through to host B.
It's going to have the same
Yeah,
restriction.
that's what I assumed.
Do we know what kind of issues with proxies are there?
I didn't really look too far into it.
20 years learning how to proxy HTTP, and we've got that down pat. And then this comes along, and it isn't HTTP.
So an issue you'll get if you've got a NAT proxying a large number of hosts, or a large number of clients, is that you'll run out of ports on the NAT.
That's one issue.
That's one. But long-running socket connection protocols traditionally have always had problems going through
Mhm.
proxies and firewalls.
Yeah, I must admit I didn't spend too much effort on looking at that, to be
Makes
honest. It was more about just sort of trying to get something up and running and working really. So, if I, just for demonstration purposes, just show you what I've done that week. So, I've just basically, essentially just written a little GPS app. So, you've got multiple in the browser you can open up this page, multiple clients, you can connect up to the WebSocket on the server. So if I do that on both of these, I was hoping for a better resolution so that I could display these tiled, but sadly not. So I've got just that with the map displaying, and then I've just got a basic CRUD app that lets me go in and just sort of change GPS locations for entities. So looking at the map, if you look at that particular user there, it's sat right outside on the road. If you go in and change their GPS location, unfortunately, because it's not tiled, I can't show you in real time. It's only moved by a little bit. Let's do something a bit better. Let's see if I can. So yeah, I mean, essentially any browser that's connected up to that will have that in, automatically updated. I even wrote, I haven't got it now, but I even wrote there's a little C# application as well that you can kind of listen to WebSockets as well. So it's quite interesting looking at that really in terms of whether or not that could be applied to Titan. But essentially, it's a really easy API to use. Just create the connection, attach event handlers to it, and you can write code accordingly. So yeah, it was fairly straightforward to implement, really.
So in your JavaScript, you had a on message handler that took an event.
Yeah.
Is that an arbitrary blob of JSON?
Yes, there's a data object from that. So whatever you send over the WebSocket, so if you want the message, you can go write event.data, and if you send that as JSON, you can then interpret that.
So is this something that you set up in the WebSocket? Because it might be that I want to send back a 4 binary bytes. Can I do that?
You can send binary data down, yes. That can be done. I didn't. I just wrote some marshalling. I think it was JAX-B, just to kind of marshal it into JSON and then send that down as raw text. But yeah, apparently you can send binary information or text information down the WebSocket.
Because I mean, most of the uses that we like to come across is we would just send it as JSON, but there might be a use case where you want to send it as a lump of compressed binary data.
Yeah.
It is binary data yours then.
Can you use it compressed in JavaScript?
You said the connections were bidirectional, and you demonstrated the server fanning out messages to all of the clients.
Yes.
Did you do anything with the clients sending messages back
To the server. At first I did, yeah, with an echo service, which just pumps something out to the log. So you send a message and it pumps something out to the log, but then I turn the attention to this.
I'm guessing there's a send message on WebSocket.
Yeah, on the WebSocket JavaScript object, you can just call send message. Again, you can send.
Presumably the fan out is implemented by, you simply have a list of connections and you just go for each connection, send the latest message.
So
I've done that on the server, yeah, there's
So
sessions.
on the server,
in
yeah.
the code that you couldn't read, it was for each session. Fan it out.
Yeah.
Because originally at the beginning you said that it sends to all the clients simultaneously, but it doesn't.
It technically doesn't know, you loop round and send it, so yeah, it's a bit of a lie.
It's only got one piece of wire.
Yeah.
It bits down that one at a time.
It's not multicast socket.
No.
No.
But interestingly, your example up here, 'cause this is exactly what I did at the fire service for our incident command software, using long polling connections to do the same things as sending vehicle GPS coordinates up along with other data.
Yeah.
And that took me about 2 weeks to get that working properly and make sure the sessions were kept open correctly and things. Whereas, as you say, this is taking you very little time and code to achieve the same result.
Exactly, yeah. And like quite a few years ago, I worked on a sort of fleet management system, and it was exactly the same thing. It was just Ajax JavaScript polling.
Speaking
Just
of
every-
long polling, do you have any idea what is WebSocket doing this implementation under the hood really? Because anyway, it could be doing long polling on one side and stay open on other side and just fan vote in the same queue.
From what I've read, as far as I know, it's just literally a TCP socket connection. It's not. It's not doing anything to kind of mimic the behaviour of a socket. It's
Does the WebSocket library on the client have any cleverness to do re-establishing connections if they die, or do you have to implement that yourself?
I think you have to
Catch
implement
the
that yourself. You catch the error, and then if you dispose of the connection, and then create a new one.
If it is just simple socket, proper socket on a client, then it won't work through proxies at all.
Do you have any?
But it can't work through proxies.
That might be the problem that
But
as I was mentioning earlier. Then
the
proxies.
browser might so the browser may work in a walled garden type environment where it's all the traffic's going through a proxy. It might implement its side of the request by connecting to the browser and could connect to the far end in the same way it does for HTTPS. But that might only work if the proxy is allowing itself to be abused by that, because the proxy may say, if I'm only going to go to 443. It may be doing, I think the other problem is, so that's fine as long as your proxy is done and just goes, you want to connect to it? There you are. And then at that point you've got channel through, you can use it. But if the proxy is doing something smarter and doing protocol inspection and making sure that there really is HTTPS going over it, then you're stuffed.
Okay.
So there, I think for this there are levels at which it may work.
So it's not just simple open socket, it is some HTTP protocol being used beneath it. To the
We are speculating.
We are,
Yeah.
we are speculating that this.
According to Wikipedia, it uses HTTP to establish the connection and hands it off to a socket.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Which is why the next question I was going to ask is the authentication, does it use HTTP authentication, or have you got to looking at any of that?
I haven't got to looking at that yet, to be honest.
Presumably, it's as one of those things. It's up to you to determine. Same as the protocol over the socket is up to you, your application to determine how you authenticate that. Is presumably going to be on an application basis.
Your HTTP thing explains the link to the session in the Spring as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you can do all of that.
I must point out it was Wikipedia edit on
You're
It's probably
full
right.
on this afternoon.
So yeah, that's kind of all I've got to show really.
Sure, sweet.
Do you know? Can you open multiple sockets, WebSockets, from within one application, or is there a limit on?
You can open as many as you want.
And they're going to create different sessions on the server. If you use one client and open multiple sockets back to the server.
If it's HTTP,
There'd be multiple sessions on the server, yeah.
Sessions on
Yeah.
there.
That's good.
It's a server for every connection attempt. So it's a session for every server connection attempt. Yeah.
So it's not 30,000, it's 60,000, it's separation.
Around there somewhere.
Have the mobile apps put in support for this, do we know?
I haven't looked at it. I was thinking about it today. I was thinking, well, should I get everyone to say, well,
We-
connect to
we-
this?
What's your machine then?
It's machine name is Allgate.
It's a local host.
Aldgate, AT-AT, yeah.
But you're right, you've got there, you would have the ability to see the icons moving on the screen in real time, associated, you know.
Yeah,
So
anytime there's an
for
update.
runners, cyclists, or just
Exactly.
people who've got
Names.
members of their family, you know, young children who've gone out to play in the park, you know, you can see when they suddenly leave the park and start heading down the motorway in a white van.
So I
it's
can
really
imagine
important.
that having to trying to maintain a socket connection over a cell network
Yeah.
would be a challenge.
Yeah. I mean, it might be better off with.
I guess
Yes, with the client initiated part.
training
I
maps.
was thinking on lines would be really useful if we can solve indoor GPS tracking. To have like, I mean, just having that in the office to work out where people are at any one time. Would be really
Yeah.
useful. You know, running
RFID
around the building
chips.
looking for
It's,
each other.
Stick it on the penguin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Quinn's
right.
hasn't it?
So if you go down to the bottom, there should be a connect button.
yeah,
If you click on that and see,
I've pressed it.
okay, and then if I change the GPS coordinates for that top far right
Yeah.
node,
What's the server name?
Aldgate.
Aldgate.
Okay, yeah.
ALDGATE.
ALD.
Yes.
Aldgate.
Right, you ready?
Yeah. No.
I didn't see the one in your desktop movie.
Is it disconnected? Yeah. It helps if I connect as well. That didn't work either. I'm looking at a different one now. It's Johnson.
Ah, moved.
Does that move on your phone?
No. Although, interestingly enough, the little Wi-Fi symbol does have the data icons
I'll
up.
make
That might
that
be the
more of a larger change, see if... Probably not.
No.
Okay.
Oh well.
That answers that question.
Alright. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.